Friday, and it had a K on the night, so that that's kind of trendy. But basically, we're switching the times over to Tuesdays at 12, and we're calling it the crash course time to keep it kind of general. I mean, that's essentially what we're doing is we're going over a crash course of just climbing and everything that it is. So yeah, I'll go ahead and pull up the presentation that we have, and we'll get going. I always like to start with kind of like a brief of what this whole thing is. So yeah, Sam, can you see the presentation just fine?
Yes.
Sweet. So yeah, like I said, it's called the Crash Course Climb. My name is Josh Leyland. I'm the climbing tower lead, and I'm pretty much running this the entire semester. Just like topics to cover in climbing, kind of just give everyone an orientation to what climbing's about, and then kind of an idea of what indoor and outdoor climbing looks like, and some cool little skills that you can learn along the way. So, put this correctly. There we go. So yeah, it's called Crash Course Climb. It's going to be every Tuesday at 12 p.m. That should be, I believe, every single Tuesday, basically, throughout the rest of the semester up until like December or so when finals are coming up. It is primarily presented by myself, but I may every now and then ask someone else that works at the tower to kind of explore a topic if they're feeling passionate about it. Every week does have its own specific topic that we work with. So I think the first week was, well, last week was climbing terminology. The first week was a bit more about grading systems. That's what it was. And, there's going to be all sorts of other like random little topics that come along. Some of them will be instructional. Some of them will be discussions. And some of them will actually be like physical skills, like tying knots and hitches and stuff like that. So a little bit more hands-on. But, for the most part, it's just going to be mostly instruction discussion based. As I talk about things, anyone that is here can ask questions and I'll talk about things with them. And I'm also open to being contacted. So if you need to reach out to me, my email is joshua.leyland@ucf.edu, and I'm always down to answer some questions. So yeah, I guess we'll get started with today's topic. So today's topic is actually modes of climbing. So when I say modes of climbing, I'm talking about just different styles of climbing. So whether you're using ropes, crash pads, ice axes, hammers, whatever, we're going to chat about that today and kind of explore just all the different avenues by which people can climb rocks and plastic walls and all that stuff. So there's a lot more that goes into it than just climbing up a rock. Several different things about it. And sometimes not even climbing up rocks if you're looking at ice climbing. We're going to start off with probably the most simple form of climbing to explain, and that's going to be bouldering. But yeah, like I said, it's a fairly simple mode of climbing, but the actual climbing that you're doing is typically a lot more complex. What I mean is that when you do climb something that short, it's typically more puzzling. You have to spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to do that short climb. It's more people that like problem solving and figuring things out. If you did watch the last seminar that I went on, it was about climbing terminology, and I'm going to be kind of loosely throwing climbing terminology around, kind of just with a little bit of the assumption that maybe you've seen the other Friday night climb / crash course of climb, but I'll explain things a little bit as we go. So when I say the pro, you may or may not remember that pro is short for protection. That just refers to anything that keeps you a little bit safer. It's the stuff that secures you to the wall or makes it possible for you to climb without seriously injuring yourself probably. So when I say the pro and all these slides, I'm just going to be going over, the way that you protect yourself for all this. So yeah, the pro for bouldering is going to be crash pads and a good spotter or a set of spotters. So if you look in that picture there's a person bouldering up on that face, and just below them, there's a very jankily placed set of crash pads, right? You can't always choose the terrain that you're going to land on. And if it's in rocks like that, you work with what you got. So they have kind of layered the crash pads in the bottom there. And the person is down there, they're not really spotting. Typically, you'd have your hands up and they're going to be kind of keeping an eye on them. But that person is there and ready to kind of push the person onto the pads and away from the rocks, hopefully, So that's really the only protection there is for bouldering, honestly. Like you just climb, and if you fall, it's a ground fall every single time. So that, in its own way, has its own set of dangers. It's not that high off the ground, sure, but hitting the ground every time has its own set of risks. So some of the traits that go along with bouldering, like I mentioned, are complex movements. Because if you're going to climb something that's like 10, 15, maybe 20 feet tall or so, if it's just really straightforward every time, then you're probably not going to be a boulderer for very long because you get very bored. So you're going to start searching for things that have, difficult movement, stuff that's going to challenge you and puzzle you. It's also pretty common that boulderers will find themselves using power moves a lot more, I guess I want to say that, because you're not spending a lot of time on a route. So you just kind of, go through your moves, expend the power, and then if you pop off, you pop off. If you, do end up doing the whole thing, then you do it. But you don't have to be on that rock for a very long time, typically. I mean, there's cases where like you may do a horizontal thing that's close to the ground for a good while. But by and large, you're not going to need a lot of stamina, I guess, until you get to some of the harder boulders. But that's just kind of a trait of that type of climbing. The boulder, so when you boulder, it's graded with the V scale or the font scale, which is European. V scale is US. We did talk about that in the first lecture, but that's just, a separate thing. So your top ropes and your other types of rope climbers are going to have their own set scale, and then bouldering alone has its own different scale that people will refer to. So some of the complications that come with bouldering, as I've kind of referred to already, is that there is a relatively high risk of injury. Since there's always a ground fall, you always have to try and fall properly. You have to watch out for twisted ankles. You have to watch out for, hitting your back on like a rock that's in that picture there. And you have to, make sure that your spotters are doing their job and hopefully helping you out there. With a ground fall every time, there's always just that hard surface that you're going to slap. So it is somewhat risky. It's arguably less risky than a tall rope climb, because you don't have just that height factor to really, cause serious injury. But things do happen. I can't say for sure that, you're not going to seriously injure yourself bouldering or rope climbing. It could go either way. So yeah, that's just kind of a brief look at bouldering. I find that a lot of people start out bouldering in gyms and they really enjoy it and they go outside. And sometimes rope climbers, when they want to kind of do something a little bit quicker for the day, or if they want to train up some moves and some power, they'll go to bouldering. So it's kind of a neat little tool, and a lot of people have a lot of good fun in the puzzle of it. So, yeah.
What did you just say? It broke up a little bit.
Oh, gotcha. So yeah, I was saying basically like bouldering, for a lot of people, they might start out bouldering in a gym and then they check it out outside and they think it's a lot of fun. For some people, it's more of a tool to, kind of take a break from their other mode of climbing. So if they, are a tower, like a rope climber of some sort, they might go bouldering because it's faster for the day, or it's convenient, or maybe they want to train their climbing movement for the most part. So yeah, good question. Good point on making me get that repeated. So the next thing I want to talk about is top roping and sport climbing. So now we're just going to start moving right into rope climbing, because there's quite a lot to explore within all the rope climbing. And this is going to be kind of the starting point, I suppose. In this picture here, I have a diagram of the difference between sport climbing and top rope climbing as well. In that first picture, you'll see that the rope is going up to a point that we can't see, but it's an anchor. We call anything that, keeps either a climber or the rope secured to a specific point in the wall. That's going to be like an anchor. So the rope goes up to the anchor, back down to the climber. For sport climbing, the anchor is either already up there or it's going to be placed up there by the climber, and they are bringing the rope up with them as they go. So the main thing is, like, where is the rope? If it's top roping, the rope's already at the top. If you're sport climbing, then you're bringing the rope up with you. So top roping itself, though, we're going to talk about that first. It's a fairly straightforward method of climbing a wall, right? So if the rope's already at the top and it's down to you, you pretty much just climb up, and then a person on the ground who's doing what we call belaying, they're, pulling in the rope as you go. They're catching you when you fall, that sort of deal. It's like you can climb, and if you fall, then you stay in that spot and you can keep working things out, and then you just keep climbing up. The falls typically aren't that big either, because if the belayer is keeping, track of where you're at and they're being, they're doing their job basically, then if you do fall, you'll fall maybe like a foot or two, and it's kind of no big deal. So that's kind of a nice thing to have, honestly. So the pro for top roping, kind of already talked about it, is an anchor at the top and then a dynamic rope running through that anchor to the belayer. When I say dynamic rope, I imagine kind of like, just like a stretchy rope, not a bungee cord per se. Bungee cord is really going to stretch a lot. But it's a rope that if you do fall, like, it's not going to feel like a jolt to your hips when you fall in your harness. It's going to kind of stretch a little bit and give you like a soft kind of landing. So yeah, there also are static ropes, but those are used for different purposes. If you top rope on a static rope, some people do that. It's not that bad. You'll just feel a little bit more of a jolt when you take a fall. Some of the traits that go along with top roping is that it requires two people. You can't top rope by yourself. That's a different kind of climbing. And it permits a climber to spend time working a part of the route. So if you're like trying out a long climb on a wall and you don't really know how to do the whole thing, you're struggling on parts, top roping enables you to go to those parts, try them out, fall without losing hardly any progress, and then keep on working that through. So many people, even if they are sport climbing, and they might do a sport climb and find they get stuck somewhere, they might set up a top rope first and then work that section out so that way they can go to sport climb it successfully. So another awesome tool and a good way to climb around. I would say that this is probably considered the lowest risk compared to most other modes of climbing. That, of course, is relative. It depends on what you're dealing with. But if the rope's already secured at the top and the fall lengths are very small and you're almost never having a ground fall, that makes top roping a pretty good option for people that are worried about the risks of climbing. Now, some complications that come along with top roping are, if you are at least doing it outside, you have to figure out how to set up that anchor, right? So that's either going to be by having someone sport climb, as you see in that right picture again, up to where the anchor goes, placing that anchor and clipping into it, and then being lowered off so now that that's there. Because these top rope anchors are just like set up outside. You have to go and do this. Or if you can reach the top of a route, then you can have someone tether to something and safely approach an edge, and then they set up a top rope and drop the rope down. Everyone goes back down to the base, and then they can top rope on that rope. So that can become a little tedious. It's kind of hard to plan sometimes, but I mean, that's kind of how you go about top roping. As far as indoors is concerned, I mean, all the staff have already placed all the top ropes on the walls anyways, so you just walk up, set up your belay device and get your belay ready, tie into your climbing rope, and then you can just start top roping. Super convenient, very nice to have in the gym for sure. So yeah, that's top roping. We're going to be talking about sport climbing on the next slide. It's a little bit more involved, but it's relatively similar. So there's a picture of someone sport climbing in a gym. It's a little grainy, I do apologize, but as you can see, like in the previous picture, there's no rope above him right now. So he's climbing still up and over something, but the rope he is dragging up along with him and clipping into quick draws as he goes. So you might think to yourself, well, if you're climbing at the top of the rope or even above the last point that you clipped in, you might fall longer, right? And that is absolutely true. So we'll talk about that probably with the pro section, but I first want to give you kind of just like a general basis. So sport climbing actually represents one of two disciplines within what you just call lead climbing in general. So whenever you are dragging that rope up and clipping it in as you go up the wall, that in general, we're just calling lead climbing because you are leading a climb up to a certain point. And in some styles of climbing, you might lead up to a point, stick to that point, and then bring someone up with you, and that would be called following. So you have a leader and a follower typically. Some people even refer to top roping as following the route that someone else just climbed. So it's kind of an easy way to think of it. You have a lead climber and you have the follower climber. So yeah, the difference between sport climbing and trad though is that with sport, you are using fixed gear that's already placed into a wall. So if you go outside or even if you're inside, you'll find that there's all these things called quick draws, right? So this is you can see in my camera right here, this is a quick draw if you need to see it. It's just two carabiners connected to a nylon, what we call dog bone, right? And then this is clipped into a metal like ring hanger that's just in the wall. So at a gym, the workers have bolted these metal rings in and then they clip all these quick draws into them, and then a climber can clip the rope into the bottom here. For outdoor climbing, it's exactly the same thing really, except that, typically inside gyms, these are already clipped to the walls. You don't have to bring your own. So outside, people will they'll drill a hole and they'll glue in like the metal rings, the hangers is what we call them. And then you have to bring your own quick draws. You can set them in. And then that's what you clip yourself into. So sport climbing is defined by having that fixed hardware, those bolts that are pre-placed. You don't have to worry about them, ideally. And then you just bring your own quick draws and go. So yeah, the pro, like I've already been talking about, is placing quick draws until you get to an anchor. At the anchor, there might be like two bolts or just like two types of clips that are either inside a gym or at the top of a route. And at that point, you will clip into that, lower down. And if you decide to leave the rope on that anchor just as is, now it's a top rope because you've gone to the top, you've clipped the rope in, and you've lowered down. So now the rope's at the top. Now it can be top rope if you'd like. So that's kind of the main difference there. Some of the traits are that, sport climbing or lead climbing in general really is kind of a high adrenaline kind of thing to do. And it's a lot more about the stamina of the climber. So you're climbing for a long time. You should have, more stamina to do the route. Most boulderers will find that if they have only bouldered and then they jump into doing sport climbing, that, the stamina is kind of hard to come by. And that, that's just, like I said, that's a trait of the style, basically. The reason I put high adrenaline is, as I was referring to, the fall zones. So this guy, he's climbing and he's last clipped into somewhere around his head. You can kind of see just to the right of his left wrist that's where he last clipped in. The rope's kind of going there. When the belayer is belaying, they're giving out slack as they climb up so they can actually keep moving and have, enough rope to keep moving. So with that slack and where he's clipped into, he's got to fall, right? So if he falls from there, he's going to fall whatever the amount of the rope slack is, and the rope's going to stretch a little bit, and maybe the belayer moves and even comes off the ground sometimes. So the fall zones are bigger, but that doesn't necessarily make it more dangerous or like less safe. It can. Everything in climbing is relative to the safety. But since they do fall and they have kind of a cushion and the belayer comes up, the whole system kind of evens out and counterbalances typically in an ideal situation. So even though you do fall far, oftentimes the climber is just fine. It feels like you're kind of falling onto a trampoline and you just kind of get back up and keep going. So yeah, and that the fall zones obviously get bigger if you climb above your last piece of protection. The way I usually like to explain it is, imagine you climb a top rope, like it's already a top rope anyways. You get to the anchor and it's like at a cliff edge or something, and then you just climb above the anchor, stand on the cliff edge, and then you fall off. Like that's basically what a lead climbing fall would kind of be like, if that's something you can imagine. So yeah, the complications behind sport climbing is probably number one is just the technical skills. So you have to use more gear. You have to know how to lead climb, how to clip properly. You have to know about setting up anchors. That's just a lot more upfront knowledge and upfront just like doing things that you have to do. So that's kind of a complication with it. It makes it a little bit harder to break into. And then there is that, yeah, that heightened risk of, taking bigger lead falls. You have to be more considerate with how you fall, how far you're falling, how much slack's in the rope. There's just a lot more stuff to pay attention to than there is with bouldering. So yeah, that is sport climbing. Any questions, Sam? We chill? Cool. So now we're going to talk about the second part of lead climbing. It's typically referred to as trad climbing, but that actually is just short for traditional climbing, because this is pretty much the second way that people started climbing back in the day when climbing was getting big. The first really being aid climbing. But traditional and sport climbing and bouldering all fall into what is called free climbing. Free climbing is not free soloing. That's not to be confused. So free climbing is just when you are the only thing that is pulling yourself up the wall. You're still secured to a rope, or you still have some sort of protection just in case you do fall, but you yourself are doing the action of grabbing the wall and pulling yourself up on the wall, right? So yeah, traditional climbing is just another way to free climb and to lead climb. So the big difference here is that with sport climbing, you have the hangers that are already like glued into the wall or bolted into the wall or whatever. Trad climbing says, hey, there is this wall here, and it's just a natural wall. I mean, maybe people have seen it, maybe people haven't, but it's just, this is the way the mountain is. It has not been modified. It's there for you to climb. So you have to bring your own stuff to put into the wall. And I don't mean bolts in this case. So yeah, I'll start going down the line here. So we have that this is the other side of lead climbing, right? So if you're lead climbing, you're either sport climbing or you're trad climbing. And those delve into the other modes we're going to be talking about, but we'll get to that. The protection here is active and passive gear that people place in cracks along a roped route. The climber is still going to be belayed. So I'm not just going to fly past that. So when we talk about active and passive gear, I'm talking about things that you just slap into a crack and then they ideally get stuck for when you want them to be stuck. And if you do fall, you fall on them and you're good to go. And ideally, you're able to remove them once you're done and then, keep climbing either higher or lower yourself down and collect all of your gear. So that way you can leave with everything that you brought. So I have a few examples of passive gear in my hand right now. So one type that's super typical is what is called nuts. So these are just basically chunks of aluminum on steel cable that just get jammed into a crack. In the picture we see here, that guy is using cams, which I'm just about to show you. But with nuts, basically, these are typically going to go in a vertical crack. And if my hand was a crack, it would just kind of like slot in there and then get stuck. And you kind of give it a tug. And at this point, you can either just throw a single carabiner on the end of them, or with sport climbing, I talked about quick draws. You can even throw a quick draw onto this as if this was your bolt that you were working with. And that goes for any of the pieces, but it's kind of a complicated thing. There's a lot that goes into placing this gear. And with that was passive gear. There's all sorts of other types of passive gear besides just nuts. Like this is one pretty strong example of it. And the same goes for active gear as well. There's a lot of different types of active gear, but the most common that you'll find is what are known as SLCDs. That stands for spring-loaded camming devices. A lot of people just shorten it down to cams. If you talk to someone who's from Europe, they almost always call cams friends, just because the brand Wild Country made the first cam. They called it the friend. So a lot of people just universally will refer to them as friends because they are your friends and they protect you. So yeah, this is a cam. Basically, when it goes into a crack, and this is what you see in the picture. Those are different style of cam, granted, but they are cams nonetheless. Pretty much you pull this trigger and the cam will get really small. And when you put it in the crack, it expands on its own and it will get stuck there. So if it's pulled, it just wants to expand more. Like it doesn't want to be pulled out of the crack by the friction, and that friction will make it push even harder against the walls. So yeah, this is the stuff that you place into the crack, and then at that point you can either clip into the carabiner that's on the end here or throw a quick draw on to extend it. There's all sorts of stuff that goes into that. So yeah, big difference here is you bring the gear, you put it in the wall, all of your protection is your responsibility entirely. So that's a big trait for it, obviously. So one other trait is that route finding is kind of like a big thing with trad climbing. When you climb a sport route, there's a set of bolts that are already like put in the wall along the route you're doing. So you have already a general idea of which direction you need to head. Because not every route's going to go directly straight up the wall. It might go left and right a little bit. It might, explore different parts of the wall. So with the bolts there in sport climbing, it's quite easy to figure out just exactly where you need to go. Whereas with trad climbing, you might get kind of a general description. You're like, well, I'm either going to follow this crack that I see in the wall. Maybe the stuff isn't that obvious. And as I go, I just need to kind of find where to protect myself as I go. It makes it a little bit more puzzly, kind of like bouldering again. And you kind of don't really always know what you're getting into. So that's kind of thrilling and a little scary at the same time. That's why I also put mental commitment on there as traits. There's a lot of mental commitment that goes into bringing your own gear, sticking it in a wall and being like, I'm completely responsible for what's about to happen. So it takes a lot of training, a lot of experience, and a lot of, just mental commitment. And I put in there also a dash of LNT, because if you think about it, when you sport climb, someone had to go into the wall, drill into this natural rock that's been there for who knows how many years. And now there's just this permanent scar in the rock, and they have to put a bolt in it. The bolt eventually will get rusty, and then it'll just get clipped off the wall, and now there's a chunk of metal stuck in the wall. So that's not necessarily LNT, which stands for leave no trace. That's not exactly the highestly sustainable practice. As granted, it's not a lot going into the wall, and it's not very visual, and often these areas are designated for climbing anyway, so that's going to happen. So it's not always a huge deal. But if it is something that you do care about, then trad climbing, does have that dash of LNT. You bring your gear, you put it in the rock, it 99 times out of 100 doesn't damage the rock, and you can remove it afterwards and leave the rock looking exactly as it did for all the years that it's been there. So some people like that. I definitely kind of enjoy that aspect of it. Now, the complications with trad climbing are that it's financially exclusive to people. So you have to buy a lot of gear in order to do this, or have a friend that has bought a lot of gear, and the gear does cost a lot of money. I mean, if you want to have enough to actually get up a face securely and not be worried about having enough stuff to put in the walls, you have to have what they call a trad rack, a full rack of gear that can fit the cracks and get you up the wall. There's also a pretty large learning curve. In addition to everything about sport climbing, now you have to worry about how to place gear, how to extend pieces and keep track of your rope, how to route find better. There's just a lot more that goes into learning it. So it's even harder to break into and kind of get in the vibe of what's going on there. And then again, high risk. A lot of the climbing is inherently risky anyways, but there's that high risk of you placing all this gear and never being 100% sure of exactly how it's going to go. So there's just a heightened risk again for trad climbing. Sweet. Any questions with that so far? Then we'll keep rolling. I believe next we're going to talk about ice climbing. Now, not a lot of people talk about ice climbing, at least in the context of rock climbing, because it's just kind of like this thing that you imagine people going up Mount Everest and they're ice climbers or whatever. But it's actually a lot simpler and a lot more similar to rock climbing than a lot of people might think. So in this picture there, that is a guy that is just straight up ice climbing. So you'll see right off the bat, there's a couple differences to a rock climber. So obviously they're wearing a lot more clothing because it's freaking cold. They are wearing very sturdy boots that have crampons attached. The crampons are those spikes that they strap to their boots there so they can, stab their shoes into the wall and kind of get a good grip. They're also using ice axes to, pierce into the wall. So that's kind of unique in the fact that you don't have to look for specific holds. You just slap that into the ice and that's where you go. Everything's a hold if it looks good. And the other new piece that you'll see is up above to the right, that bolt looking thing that's just in the wall by itself holding a quick draw. That's an ice screw. So those screws are anywhere between this long to that long or so. And they screw those into the ice, and then that's their bolt. That's where they clip their stuff. So they're literally screwing metal into ice and then, hanging their stuff off that and connecting to those. So somewhat different, but also somewhat similar to rock climbing. So ice climbing for rock climbers is often kind of an alternative to rock climbing. So ice climbing offers a winter venue for climbers. If it's super cold in all the other places, you're what, it's already cold enough. Might as well throw on a puffy and just go start ice climbing. That's how some people might think of it. And for ice climbers too, it can either be top rope or lead. So you can lead an ice pitch. That's what this guy's doing here. But you can also top rope an ice pitch. If you are maybe skiing around and you decide hey, we can ski to this cliff edge and then set up an anchor on a tree or something, you can lower the rope down and then lower a climber into an ice climb and then have them climb up to that, that spot on the cliff there. So you don't have to know how to lead climb. It definitely makes it a little bit easier to have more options, but you also have that top rope option as an ice climber. And some people, if they live in, places that have like frozen waterfalls, like if you live in Alaska, ice climbing might be the first form of climbing that you even see. You might not even know much about rock climbing and then start ice climbing. And that's, it's similar enough to kind of break into it. So the protection, like I was talking about, are ice screws and quick draws, which secure the rope. The ice screws, they're pretty like self-explanatory. You just stick it in the wall, screw it through, and then it spits out the ice that it's getting shoved in, and then it's just ready to go. It's kind of sitting there. So that makes, that's kind of a trait of it. It's a unique terrain, and you have all those additional tools. But some of the complications that go with it is that, again, it's financially exclusive. Ice axes are quite expensive. Winter gear is expensive. Crampons are expensive, and like all that stuff is just extra to what you might have as a rock climber. The high risk in this case is actually a result of the unique terrain. It's ice, right? So it's not rock. It's not quite as secure, and it can be difficult to assess it. Like if you do an ice climb in the early morning, compared to just like 3 or 4 hours later, it might be significantly more dangerous just a few hours later because the sun's out. So there's that heightened risk with just the way the weather is, and knowing if the ice is what they call good ice or if it's sloshy ice or if it's wet. All that stuff is going to factor in. You have to worry about your ropes freezing. You have to worry about your ice screws getting frozen and stuck into the wall. All sorts of weird, unique considerations that go into it. And then I would say accessibility is another big one. Already for Florida climbers, rock climbing in general is kind of a less accessible thing. So especially for Floridians and people that, live in the South or don't really have access to like huge waterfalls around them that freeze, you have to travel to go ice climbing if you're not around it. So it's kind of hard to get access to that. And as a result, that makes it pretty hard to break into it if you live in certain areas. So that's kind of just a little bit about ice climbing. It's pretty similar. It's kind of, just another option for rock climbers. And it also plays into other types of climbing that we're about to talk about. So we'll probably get going on that. Any questions, Sam? Rad. So now we're going to talk about aid climbing. So aid climbing is really the OG form of climbing. Because back in the day, people would hike up mountains, and when they started to decide, like, hey, this is getting pretty technical, we need to find other ways to get up, a mountain. Aid climbing is what came in. So if you watch, like documentaries like Valley Uprising and stuff like that, just all the stuff about Yosemite back in the 70s and stuff like that, a lot of the climbing was aid climbing. So we'll go into that. Now, this climber on the left has a ridiculously large amount of gear, and that is actually kind of an attribute of what we call big walling, which I'll talk a little bit more about in just a second. But aid climbing is an alternative to free climbing phase. So free climbing includes like ice climbing, rock, like sport climbing, trad climbing, all that stuff. That's all free climbing. And then aid climbing is going to be, that thing that's separate from free climbing. So you have aid climbs and free climbs, those tree off and other things. So yeah, the protection that you're using, I put on here is literally every single possible thing that you could possibly attach to a wall. That's the stuff that you're going to use for aid climbing. Anything you can get your hands on. If there's bolts there, you're going to use the bolts. I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation that, we're going to explore modes of climbing that might require hammers. For aid climbing, if they have pitons, those like giant nails with holes in them, they're going to hammer those into the wall. They might use those. Anything on a trad rock, cams, nuts like we talked about, quick draws, all that stuff, even additional gear. So I think I put on there rope tools. So you have to like climb up the rope basically. So the difference between aid climbing and free climbing, when you're climbing on the wall, you're depending on yourself to pull yourself up the wall. With aid climbing, you're securing the rope to the wall, whether it's already at a top point or if you're leading up and you're securing it as you go. You're securing the rope and then you're climbing directly on the rope or on the gear that you're setting into the wall. So you're not physically climbing the rock wall. You might not be touching it that much even, but you're going to be climbing up the tools and the rope that you have on you. So if you think of like a window washer for a skyscraper, when they go to clean a window, they're going to either lower in from the top of a place, or they're going to kind of, climb up a rope that's already set to get to a certain story. That's aid climbing in and of itself, right? So they're using gear to go up a rope just to kind of change their vertical position. So why would we aid climb, or why is that necessary, right? So if you are big walling is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. It's climbing a wall that is quite tall. For most of the modes of climbing that we talked about, they're going to be doing what will be known as single pitch climbing. That's a climb that goes as far as 1/2 of a rope length. So that's about 120 feet, typically the highest that you could go on a single pitch. Multiple pitches is when a climber is going to go up stay on the wall somewhere and then bring their follower up with them. And then they're going to be stuck together. And then they're going to keep kind of slingshotting up a wall. That's when you start to get closer to big wall. Big wall is doing multi-pitch climbing, but just for a really long time on a really tall face. And typically with big walls, some of the pitches that you're doing, you can free climb them. And sometimes you simply cannot free climb a pitch just because it's that difficult. It just doesn't have the holds for it. You just can't do it. So then you can instead aid climb up that just to get past that pitch and kind of speed things up, make it a little bit more accessible to you. So that's why you might be aid climbing. So we'll talk about more of the traits. So with aid climbing, it is pretty slow to do, especially if you are bringing the rope up as you go, kind of leading an aid pitch. That is a thing. So you pretty much have to put a piece in, you connect your rope to it, you test it, you bounce it before you put your weight on it, and then you slowly haul yourself up a couple inches, maybe a foot or two, and then you just keep doing that over and over and over and over and over again, as tall as you can go. So that takes a lot of time, that takes a lot of gear placements, that takes a lot of assessment, that takes a lot of just hauling yourself up on a rope. It's slow, it's arduous, but it's relatively secure as well, for the most part. If you climb the harder aid climbs, then you're kind of on purpose climbing stuff that's less secure just for the thrill of it, I suppose. But in general, since you're just placing gear and relying totally on gear and not necessarily just your hands, it's relatively secure. Now, some of the complications, as you can see by the picture again, it's financially exclusive. If you were doing a big wall like that and you just know you needed that much gear, that's probably like $2,000 of stuff hanging from your hips right there. That's absolutely just super duper financially exclusive. That's rough. And then technical prowess is also super important. Like if you're going to be placing gear just back to back to back to back all the time, you have to know exactly how to place it. You have to know how to assess it. And that goes for all the pieces that you have. So you really have to know how to trust your gear and have quite a lot of experience to go ahead and throw that stuff on there and get going. So that's kind of a good bit about aid climbing there. Aid climbing does use a different rating system than the Yosemite Decimal System, which is what we use for rope climbing. But oftentimes they put a Yosemite Decimal System on a route. And then for the aid pitches, they will throw the aid climbing rating on there as well to kind of tell you basically how dangerous the aid climb is. Because aid climbing ratings are just telling you how secure are all the placements along the route, how present are they. So yeah, that's kind of how that goes. Any questions about aid climbing? Rad. Now we're going to talk about alpine climbing. So with everything that we just talked about, alpine climbing basically takes every single one of those and it's just like, that's mine. We're going to do that. So as we look at it, this is where you'll usually see like Instagram videos of people on the tops of like seriously high mountains with clouds below them, kind of trailing along a set of rocks, just like you can see here with a rope attached between the two of them. That's a part of it for sure. But alpine climbing literally can be like everything, all of that stuff packed in one. So alpinism is for climbers who like see a mountain and they want to take the technical ascent up. There are obviously some mountains that you can simply just hike up, and that's going to be hiking at that point. But if you're using climbing, if you're using ice climbing, trad climbing, sport climbing, whatever else, as part of your efforts to get up that mountain, then at that point it's kind of becoming alpinism. So the protection here is everything that we've mentioned for sport, trad, and ice climbing, in addition to camping supplies if you need it, like for an expedition. And the trick here is to minimize all that as much as possible to make sure you're bringing a small amount of that stuff as you need. So as you can see here, these two people just have one single backpack and they're carrying everything they need to ice climb. They're carrying everything they need to sport climb, to trad climb. Maybe they have like camping stoves, like all that stuff is just in those bags and they're trying to keep it as light as possible because this is basically the marathon of climbing. So like this is probably the highest like tax on your body basically. So yeah, some of the traits are bringing as little gear as possible. You want to keep everything light because you're going to be traveling for a very long time typically. So you don't want those extra ounces to really drag you down. High stamina is definitely a big one. I guess to give a better idea, in alpine climbing, when you do look at a mountain, you're just like, I'm going to get up that. You may be hiking at some points. You might just be free climbing certain pitches if they have bolts, or if you're doing trad climbing. You might be doing what's called short roping, which is actually in this picture. What they're doing is short roping. That's where you can hike it, but it's a little bit dangerous and you're not really sure how to feel about it. So you can't rock climb it necessarily. If you remember from the grade talks, we talked about the classification rating. So this is what we call like class 3 or 4 terrain maybe. So not where you need to rock climb, but where you don't want to necessarily just walk around without any protection. So they're connected to a rope with each other. If one of them goes over the edge, hopefully the other hits the deck, grabs onto something, and then they're secure. So yeah, high stamina is definitely up there. You have to be able to ice climb, hike, short rope, and scramble around. All that stuff within, I don't know, you might be spending a day doing this, or you might be spending 2 weeks doing this. Like, it depends on the type of alpine climb that you're doing. And then keeping everything fast and simple is a big one. A lot of alpinists will talk about, just efficiencies, trying to minimize the skills and the time spent doing things as much as possible. Just keep everything super quick and super simple, so that way, the end goal can be achieved at the time that you want it to be achieved. Now, some of the biggest complications. These complications go for a lot of the other disciplines as well, especially big wall. But weather is a really big one. So if you go on an alpine climb, you go out in the middle of nowhere and you're like, we're going to take a week to get up this peak and it's going to be great. Obviously, if you're just on a mountain somewhere and the weather turns south, that can be very dangerous. So careful planning and, being prepared for the worst is another big thing. And weather is like a serious consideration for alpinists. Efficiency is another big one too. If it's your first go at alpine climbing and you don't really feel, super comfortable with your rope skills, you're kind of fumbling with things around and you know what you're doing, but it's taking a while. I mean, all those minutes add up and they can add to, an extra day, an extra 2 days, an extra couple of hours. And that stuff really matters when you're trying to, reach a goal by a certain time with X amount of food and water. And then, of course, another complication is technical skills. So if it requires ice climbing, sport climbing, trad climbing, all the skills we mentioned, you got to know them. You got to know how to do them. And that's just a huge learning curve. There's a lot that goes into that. So it makes it pretty hard to break into alpine climbing. Usually it's best to, kind of find some friends who are already in it, have the discipline going, and see what it's all about and kind of feel it out from there. So yeah, kind of wild, kind of adventurous, but a little complicated. Any questions? Cool. So I do think we're going to wrap. What's up?
I said so many sketchy things.
There's a lot that goes into it. Yeah, it's quite a lot. Yeah, we're going to have some closing remarks here. So with all the stuff that we've been talking about, I want to just have a couple little disclaimers. So many modes of climbing share traits, as we've seen, and they intersect in several ways. Like top roping is something you might do in trad climbing, you might do it in ice climbing, you might do it in alpine climbing, and that stuff all intersects quite a lot, right? Now, one thing that's super important is to note that, no discipline's better than the other. A person who is an alpine climber is not necessarily cooler or better than someone that does top rope climbing. It's about where your comfort is, about what you know, and what's accessible to you. And as long as you enjoy it, that's kind of, the only thing that really matters. You'll find that not every climber does all of these, some of these, or even 2 of them. You might just be a boulderer and you're a boulderer for life and you love it and you enjoy it. That's totally cool. You don't have to learn how to trad climb if you don't want to. If you're a trad climber and that's all you do, you don't have to, be ashamed of not sport climbing or doing other things. So follow your ambitions. Just follow the climbing that you want to do. Explore the things that you want to. Don't explore the things you don't want to if you don't want to do that. That's totally cool. I've mentioned it a couple times as well, but I think that if you do want to break into other styles of climbing, but you're like, oh, I don't know if that's financially accessible. I don't know how to even start doing that sort of thing. Well, the best thing you can do is just find other climbers that are passionate about their mode of climbing, and then they can break down some of those barriers. So if you don't have the technical knowledge, then a friend can, lead a climb and set up a top rope for you and get you, started on just rope climbing. If you don't want to purchase trad gear, whether just because you don't want to or it's just ridiculously expensive, then find someone that has the gear and can kind of, lend it for the day and show you the ropes a bit, give you some more interest perhaps. Are you feeling out of shape on a boulder problem? You're not really feeling like you're prepared to actually put that effort in? Well, you can always go to an indoor gym and train at a boulder on like bouldering and stuff like that. So there's always kind of a way to break in. The best thing I can say is just find other people that are passionate and friendly and kind of, go with them and see what they're passionate about and why they're passionate. So yeah, really just everyone starts somewhere and where you end up is kind of up to you. Just, follow your passions. Sweet. So yes, this is the end of this presentation. We will be continuing to do the crash course of climb Tuesdays at 12 or so. These recordings should be online on the Outdoor Adventure website, I believe. So if you have missed any of these and you feel like you want to, get caught up, I would highly, highly, highly suggest looking at the at least the climbing terminology one, because I'm just going to be kind of throwing jargon around throughout the rest of the semester, and it'll make it a little bit easier to understand. And I'll try to explain as much as I can as I go, but we'll go with it. So yeah, Sam, you got anything else?
Nope, I'm good. Thanks, Josh.
Sweet. We'll see y'all next week. On the